Welcome. My name is Darius, and I want to share a true story with you. During an examination, Dr. Marcus Oakley's brow furrowed with concern. He paused, then cautiously inquired about Elaine's previous doctor. Elaine simply stated it was her husband, also a gynecologist. The doctor fell silent, setting aside his instruments. "You need immediate lab work," he declared, his tone grave. "What I'm seeing shouldn't be there." His words struck a chord of dread deep within her. She couldn't yet fully grasp the cause of the experienced specialist's alarm. In that instant, her familiar world, where Sterling was both a loving partner and a trustworthy physician, began to fracture for the first time. Elena remained seated, struggling to dismiss the strangeness of the doctor's question. Marcus Oakley struck her as a serious, thoughtful man, not prone to careless remarks. His office, located in a modern medical center on the city's edge, was a last resort. She'd only come because the pain had become unbearable. For the past 6 months, she'd been plagued by sharp, wave-like spasms in her lower abdomen, often doubling her over in agony. Her menstrual cycle was in complete disarray, with painful and unpredictable bleeding. Each time, Sterling had reassured her, attributing the changes to her age of 42, insisting her body was merely adjusting. But a nagging intuition resisted his explanations, a deep-seated feeling that something far from normal was occurring within her body. When Sterling left to visit his ailing mother in Atlanta, she seized the opportunity to secretly consult with an outside physician. Dr. Oakley meticulously reviewed her ultrasound results, shaking his head occasionally. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Elaine noticed a tightening in his jaw muscles. He adjusted the sensor angle repeatedly, seeking a clearer image. Finally, he set the device down and turned to her. "He promised me he would divorce you," Oliva finally confessed, her voice barely audible. "He told me you were sick, that you couldn't have children, that your marriage was long dead. I didn't know that he was the one who made you sick." Her words served as a confession, confirming Elena's worst fears. How many children do you have together?" Elena asked, feeling the world around her dissolving into chaos. Oliva looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears and remorse. "2, she whispered. "Macy, she's 5, and Isaac, he's 3. They think Daddy works in another city, which is why he rarely comes home." Elena felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. It turned out that while she was enduring the pain caused by the embedded IUD, Sterling was creating a separate family with a young nurse. He was raising the children he had denied her. He played the role of a loving father to some and an indifferent husband to another. The security guard ended his call and approached them, clearly having received instructions from Sterling. "Elena," he said with forced politeness, "I need to ask you to leave the building. The manager said you don't have the right to be here without his presence." Elena knew her time was up. She quickly left the practice, carrying with her the photographs of the documents and the devastating knowledge of her husband's double life. In her car, she contacted Detective Blunt and relayed what she had learned. Now, they possessed not only evidence of a crime against her health, but also a motive explaining Sterling's actions. Detective Blunt listened intently, promising to immediately question Oliva Ree as a witness. She also planned to obtain a warrant to search Sterling's home and workplace, seizing any documents that might shed light on his criminal activity. Elena drove home, realizing her life was irretrievably shattered. The man she had trusted most in the world was capable of monstrous betrayal. Oakley's name appeared on the screen. "Elaine Thames," he said warmly. "I heard what happened. How are you feeling? Do you need any medical assistance?" His concern felt genuine, devoid of any hidden motives. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a flicker of warmth in response to his simple human compassion.
"Physically, I'm okay.
Emotionally, I suppose that will come with time." Dr. Oakley offered her psychological support and regular checkups to monitor her health closely after the removal of the IUD. After hanging up, Elaine walked out onto the balcony and gazed at the sprawling city below. Somewhere, confined within the walls of a detention center, sat the man who had been slowly poisoning her for 8 long years. Tomorrow, the trial would begin, with its grueling interrogations, invasive expert analyses, and the painfully public dissection of the most intimate details of her life. But she was ready to face it all, fueled by her unwavering determination to achieve justice and to warn other women against falling victim to a similar fate. The monologue at the end is skipped, as it is not part of the primary content to be translated. The county courthouse was overflowing with reporters, Sterling's former colleagues from the medical community, and morbidly curious onlookers, all drawn by the high-profile case of a respected doctor who had deliberately harmed his own wife. Elaine sat in the front row, steeling herself against the whispers and curious stares. In the months since the investigation began, she had learned to block out the intrusive public attention, focusing solely on her primary goal, achieving justice. Sterling sat in the defendant's dock, looking gaunt and aged beyond his years. His once impeccable appearance had been replaced by a sickly pallor and nervous tics. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something in his ear, but Sterling merely stared blankly into the void, as if he still couldn't fully comprehend the gravity of his situation. There was something in his eyes, a look beyond professional interest, something akin to shock at what he had witnessed, that instinctively made her clench her fists. "You mentioned your husband has been treating you for 5 years?" he asked, wiping his hands with antiseptic. "And what exactly has he been prescribing all this time?" Elena struggled to recall. Hormonal pain medication mostly, and occasional anti-inflammatory suppositories. Sterling had always been adamant that he understood her body better than any other doctor could. Dr. Oakley approached the ultrasound monitor, pointing to an irregularly shaped dark spot in the uterine region. "See this growth?" he asked, his voice strained. "It's a foreign body, and all indications suggest it's been there for quite some time. It resembles an old-style intrauterine device, or IUD, that has become embedded in the tissue." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "An IUD," she repeated, barely believing her ears. "I've never had an IUD. I would know if someone had placed something like that in me." The doctor retrieved her medical chart and flipped through the pages. "There's no record here of an intrauterine contraceptive being inserted," he confirmed. "But things like this don't just appear on their own. Someone must have put it in, and it didn't happen recently." Elaine struggled to focus, searching her memory for any explanation, but found nothing. She had always been wary of IUDs, considering them invasive and risky. Sterling was aware of her fears and had never broached the subject as a method of contraception. "I need to run additional tests," Dr. Oakley stated, rising from his desk. "Inflammatory markers, tumor markers, the full spectrum. What I'm seeing on the ultrasound raises serious concerns. The tissues around the foreign body are altered, showing signs of chronic inflammation." He left the office, leaving her alone with a whirlwind of terrifying thoughts. He had not only deprived her of her health and the possibility of motherhood, but had also deceived her for years, building a family with another woman. Now, she had to summon the strength for a final confrontation with the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court battle, the exposure of his lies, the daunting task of proving what seemed beyond belief. But, most importantly, she needed to learn to live again, free from the illusions she had held about the love and loyalty of the man who had betrayed her in the cruelest possible way. If you enjoy this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. The house greeted Elena with its familiar silence. But now, that silence felt menacing, filled with hidden secrets and lies. She entered Sterling's home office, where his personal computer sat, a machine she had never had reason to use before. She guessed the password on her third attempt, his mother's birthday, the person he held most dear. The desktop was meticulously organized. Folders contained medical documents, scientific articles, and... "Okay, I understand. Here's the interpreted and slightly expanded translation of the provided text into American English." Photos from conferences filled the hard drive, but one folder in particular, bearing the unusual name Forever Now, snagged her attention. Elena clicked it open, and her heart plunged into her chest at the sight that unfolded on the screen. Inside were hundreds of images capturing Eliva in intimate moments, snapshots from their shared trips, romantic dinners bathed in soft light, and casual outings that included small children. One photo showed Sterling beaming as he held a girl who looked to be about 5 years old, her features an undeniable mirror of his own. Beside her stood a younger boy, similarly stamped with his distinct characteristics. These, Elena realized with a sickening certainty, were the Macy and Isaac that Oliva had alluded to. His reputation was in ruins, his career was over, and before him loomed the bleak prospect of many years confined behind bars. Judge Ava Jenkins, a middle-aged woman with a stern and unwavering demeanor, opened the session and gave the floor to the state prosecutor. The prosecutor methodically laid out the detailed circumstances of the case, each fact resonating like a hammer blow against the defendant's already tarnished reputation. The surreptitious insertion of the carcinogenic IUD, the years of elaborate deception, the existence of a secret, parallel family, and the cold, calculating correspondence with his mistress. The first witness called to the stand was Oliva Reese, who entered the courtroom pale and visibly trembling. Her pregnancy was now quite apparent, her rounded belly adding an element of poignant drama to her testimony. She sat in the witness chair, unable to meet Sterling's pleading gaze, which followed her every move. "Please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant," the prosecutor requested. Oliva spoke softly, but her words were distinctly audible in the hushed silence that had fallen over the courtroom. "He told me his wife was infertile from birth, that doctors had forbidden her from getting pregnant due to genetic abnormalities. I believed him. I honestly thought I was helping a good man find happiness." She recounted how Sterling had promised her a divorce from his wife and a legitimate marriage, how he had planned their future together with their children. She revealed that he had even told her that he was deliberately making his wife sick so that she wouldn't be able to claim the assets in the divorce proceedings. As Oliva's shocking confession unfolded, a collective murmur of outrage rippled through the courtroom. He said it would be better for everyone if she didn't have to suffer through a messy divorce. Elena tried to compose herself, grasping for a rational explanation. Perhaps the doctor was mistaken. Maybe it was something else, not an IUD. A few minutes later, a nurse entered with a tray for drawing blood. The young woman worked in silence, but Elaine couldn't miss the exchange of glances between her and the doctor upon his return, a silent dialogue charged with professional anxiety. "Doctor, the inflammatory markers are really through the roof," the nurse quietly reported, showing him the rapid test results. Hearing those words, Elaine felt an icy grip of fear. Something was deeply wrong with her body, something she had never suspected. Dr. Oakley sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk. "Elaine," he began, his voice serious, "I need to be absolutely honest with you. What is in your uterus poses a real threat to your health. It's not just a foreign body. It's a source of chronic inflammation that could have provoked severe tissue changes." He pulled out a referral form and began filling it out. "You need immediate hospitalization at the County General Medical Center for the surgical removal of this object. The operation cannot be delayed. Every day you wait increases the risks." Elaine stared at him, unable to process the enormity of what was happening. Just that morning, she was a woman dealing with chronic pain. Now, she was confronted with urgent surgery and grave risks. How could this be happening? How could she be so unaware of what was occurring within her own body? "And one more thing," the doctor added, handing her the referral. "Given the circumstances under which this foreign body may have ended up in your system without your knowledge, I strongly recommend you contact law enforcement. What happened to you may qualify as a felony." The word struck her like a death knell. Elaine took the referral with trembling hands, still struggling to comprehend the gravity of her situation. A crime? But the most gut-wrenching discovery was a trove of digital correspondence spanning over 5 years. Elena opened the message file and began to read, each line tightening the knot of horror in her stomach. The exchanges began innocuously enough, with routine work-related questions, but gradually morphed into deeply personal confessions and elaborate plans for the future. In one message, dated 3 years prior, Sterling laid out his scheme to Oliva. "Don't worry, darling. I solved the Elaine problem once and for all. I gave her a little gift during her appendectomy. She definitely won't be having kids now, and we can finally be together without those pesky air questions. Elena reread the message, her mind reeling, refusing to believe the words staring back at her. Sterling had coldly orchestrated her sterilization, discussing it with his mistress, as if it were a mundane task on his to-do list. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision during surgery. It was a carefully premeditated crime. The correspondence spiraled into further depths of cynicism. Sterling detailed how he comforted his wife whenever she complained of pain, how he prescribed useless treatments, all the while knowing the true source of her suffering. He even made light of it, calling himself a brilliant doctor who had managed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, eliminating the need for children with his wife and clearing the path to start a new family. In another folder, Elaine unearthed scanned copies of bank documents that completely shattered her already crumbling perception of her husband. Regular monthly transfers of $5,000 to Eliva Reese, explicitly labeled as alimony for Macy and Isaac. It became chillingly clear that Sterling was financially supporting 2 children with his mistress, while simultaneously convincing his wife that their family budget couldn't accommodate having children of their own. Sterling's lawyer attempted to discredit Eliva's testimony, subtly suggesting that she had a vested interest in the outcome of the case. But the young woman steadfastly answered all the questions posed to her, providing specific dates and directly quoting incriminating messages from the digital correspondence. Her sincerity was palpable, evident even to the most skeptical members of the jury. The next witness was Dr. Oakley, who testified about his growing suspicions from his very first examination of Elaine. As an experienced physician, he couldn't ignore the fact that Elaine's symptoms simply didn't align with the diagnosis that her husband had provided. The inflammatory process was too localized, and the pain was too specific to be attributed to ordinary, age-related changes. Surgeon Dr. Harmon presented the extracted IUD to the court, meticulously explaining why devices like the Serif IUD had been banned from use. The carcinogenic properties of the alloy used in the device had been proven through numerous scientific studies. As a result, all such products were subject to mandatory and strict disposal procedures. Inserting such an IUD, he explained, was tantamount to slowly poisoning the patient. A forensic expert then read aloud the detailed results of the analysis of Sterling's computer, confirming the authenticity of the damning correspondence with Eliva. The digital trail left no room for doubt. The messages were unequivocally genuine and had not been fabricated in any way. Particularly compelling were Sterling's own chilling confessions about how he had solved the problem with his wife during her appendectomy. A medical expert then announced the official conclusion regarding the victim's health. The defendant's deliberate actions led to Elaine Thames' irreversible infertility and the development of a precancerous condition, which, without timely medical intervention, would have inevitably progressed to stage 2 cancer. Who could have committed such a crime against her? Who had access to her body during a vulnerable moment? A single thought, terrifying and seemingly impossible, began to surface from the depths of her mind, a thought she resisted entertaining, yet one that explained everything. The person she trusted most in the world might have betrayed her trust in the most monstrous way imaginable. Leaving the medical center, Elena felt the foundations of her life, the life she had built over the past 15 years, crumbling around her. A world where Sterling was a loving husband and a caring doctor, where their marriage felt secure and unwavering. Now, that world was cracking, and she dreaded what horrors would be revealed when it finally shattered. The operating room at County General Medical Center blazed with bright light. When the surgeon, Dr. Vernon Harmon, began to extract the foreign body from Elena's uterus, he paused, his instruments momentarily suspended in midair, stunned by what he saw. The IUD, blackened with age, was so deeply embedded in the tissue that its removal demanded extreme caution. Its metallic arms were literally cutting into the uterine walls, leaving behind traces of necrosis and inflammation. "Good grief," he muttered, carefully examining the extracted object. "This is a Serif IUD. They were banned for use over 10 years ago because of their high cancer risk." The assisting nurse handed him a sterile container, and the surgeon placed the IUD inside. Even beneath the layer of biological buildup, the distinctive shape of the device was visible, a device once hailed as a revolutionary contraceptive method. Dr. Harmon continued the operation, meticulously cleaning the damaged tissues and stemming the bleeding. The inflammatory process had affected a considerable area, and in certain places, the tissues appeared suspicious. He collected several samples for a pathology report, knowing the results could be dire. There were also documents for the purchase of an apartment in Aliva's name, insurance policies to secure the children's futures, and detailed plans for their education. Sterling had meticulously constructed a parallel, fully fledged family, pouring not just money, but also his affection and emotional energy into it. In their private messages, he referred to Macy as his princess and Isaac as his heir, while viewing his wife as a disposable burden, something to be shed with as little fuss as possible. It was agonizing to read messages from just the past few months, where Sterling and Aliva casually discussed divorce plans. He wrote that he would simply wait for Elaine to develop cancer from the insidious IUD, then divorce her under the sympathetic guise of being unable to cope with the emotional strain of his wife's illness. Public opinion would be firmly on his side, and he would retain control of the assets. Elaine swiftly copied all the discovered files onto a flash drive, knowing they were the irrefutable keys to exposing her husband's monstrous actions. But emotionally, she was in tatters, completely devastated by the sheer scope of his betrayal. The man she had shared her life with for 15 years hadn't simply deceived her. He had systematically dismantled her life, meticulously planning each and every step of its destruction. The phone shattered the silence. Detective Blunt's name flashed across the screen. Elaine Thames, the detective's familiar voice said, "I have some news for you, and I'm afraid it's not good. We received the results of the additional tissue analysis taken during the surgery. You have precancerous changes 3rd degree. This is a direct consequence of the prolonged exposure to the carcinogenic IUD within your system." Elaine listened to the detective's grim explanation, a numbing wave of horror washing over her. The presence of the carcinogenic device within her body for a period of 8 years caused irreparable harm to her reproductive system. When Elaine herself was finally given the opportunity to speak, she rose slowly and deliberately approached the podium. An almost palpable silence descended over the courtroom as everyone waited with bated breath to hear her testimony. She paused for a long moment, gathering her thoughts, and then began to speak in a calm, steady voice. "I entrusted this man with my health, my life, and my love. For 15 years, I considered him to be the closest person on earth, my most trusted confidant." Her voice remained even, but every word resonated with pain and profound disappointment. "He used my love and trust against me. He callously weaponized his professional knowledge to inflict harm." She continued, "For 8 long years, I suffered in pain, completely unaware of the cause, and he comforted me, knowing all along that he himself was the source of my suffering." Elaine recounted to the court how she had eagerly planned for motherhood, how she had dreamed of having children, and how she had ultimately blamed herself for her supposed infertility. "Now I know that I will never be a mother," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "He deprived me of that fundamental right. He made that deeply personal decision for me, and he disposed of my body as if it were nothing more than his own personal property." She spoke of the years of betrayal and deceit, her husband's double life, and the children he was raising with another woman, while his own wife silently endured the devastating consequences of his crimes. "The most terrible thing is not the physical pain," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "but the shattering realization that the person you trusted more than anyone else in the world was capable of such unspeakable cruelty." When Elaine finally concluded her testimony, an absolute silence hung over the courtroom. 8 years with a cancer-causing device inside her body could not have been without consequence. Once the surgery was complete, the surgeon personally escorted the patient to the intensive care unit. Elena gradually regained consciousness after the anesthesia, her mind slowly clearing. The first thing she saw was the concerned face of Dr. Harmon, leaning over her bed. "The operation was a success," he said softly, though his tone carried a note of warning. "We removed the foreign body, but what we found raises serious concerns." He showed her a clear container, holding the blackened IUD. The device has a serial number, and 3847. We'll definitely run it through the database to find out where it came from. Elena stared at the piece of metal that had been poisoning her body for 8 years, struggling to reconcile herself with the reality of what had happened. The IUD looked sinister, its surface coated in a dark film, its sharp edges clearly having traumatized the surrounding tissues. How could something like this have ended up inside her, without her knowledge? How could she have been unaware of this foreign body? Dr. Harmon explained that old-style devices were often inserted without adequate pain relief, and patients might not recall the procedure, particularly if it was performed under general anesthesia during another surgery. But the primary concern was not the IUD's presence itself, but the ramifications of its prolonged existence within her body. The Seraph IUD had been withdrawn from the market precisely due to its potential to cause malignant tumors. A few hours later, a woman in a somber suit entered the room and introduced herself as Detective Nia Blunt. She produced a recorder and a notebook, settling into a chair beside the bed. Her presence signified the case had taken on official status, that what had occurred was being investigated as a possible crime. Sterling hadn't just robbed her of the ability to bear children, he had essentially sentenced her to a slow and agonizing death from cancer. If she hadn't sought the counsel of Dr. Oakley, she would have developed advanced cancer within a year or two, with minimal chances of recovery. Detective Blunt continued, explaining the legal ramifications of the case. Sterling now faced charges of not only causing grievous bodily harm, but also attempted murder. The combined charges carried a maximum sentence of up to 15 years in prison. The detective also informed her that she had obtained a warrant to search the house and seize all documents related to the case. Elaine told her about the shocking correspondence and bank documents she had uncovered, confirming the motive behind the crime. Detective Blunt listened intently, instructing her not to touch the computer until the forensic experts arrived, to preserve the integrity of the digital evidence. The search was scheduled for the following morning, but the detective warned that Sterling might try to return home early to destroy the incriminating evidence. Just as Elaine ended the call with Detective Blunt, she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening in the hallway. Her heart slammed against her ribs, fear constricting her throat. She hadn't expected Sterling to be back so soon. "Honey," his voice called out from the hallway. "I'm back early. I have a surprise for you." His tone was its usual blend of affection and concern. But now, that manufactured affection felt like a repulsive mask, hiding the monster beneath. Elaine frantically closed all the files on the computer, but intentionally left the screen displaying the damning correspondence open. Let him see that his carefully constructed world had been exposed. Let him understand that the game was finally over. She retrieved the container holding the extracted IUD from her purse, the physical evidence that Dr. Harmon had given her. Many women in the audience were openly weeping, imagining themselves in her place. Even some of the jurors struggled to contain their emotions, deeply moved by the heartbreaking story of years of suffering and profound betrayal. Sterling's lawyer desperately attempted to portray his client's actions as a medical mistake, perhaps the result of overwhelming stress and professional burnout. However, his arguments sounded hollow and unconvincing against the backdrop of the clear and irrefutable evidence of deliberate intent. The damning correspondence with his mistress left absolutely no doubt that his wife's sterilization had been meticulously planned well in advance. Sterling himself declined to testify, limiting himself to a formal acknowledgement of the factual circumstances of the case. He sat with his head bowed, refusing to meet his former wife's gaze. His silence spoke volumes, perhaps more eloquently than any excuses he could have offered. The judge retired for deliberations, which lasted for several tense hours. When the session finally resumed, Judge Jenkins read the verdict in a stern, official tone. Sorling Nicholas Thames is found guilty of causing grievous bodily harm, committed with particular cruelty, and is hereby sentenced to 7 years of incarceration in a maximum security prison. She continued, "Additionally, the court permanently revokes Mr. Thames' medical license and orders him to pay Elaine Thames a $500,000 compensation for moral damages. He must also reimburse all costs incurred for the victim's medical treatment and rehabilitation." Sterling was immediately led away in handcuffs, his head still bowed. He never once looked up at Elaine. His lawyer announced his intention to file an appeal, but everyone present understood that, given the overwhelming weight of the evidence, the chances of obtaining any leniency were practically non-existent. The medical community had already publicly disavowed their former colleague. "Elena," the detective began, "I need to ask you a few questions about how this device might have ended up in your body. Did your husband have access to your medical chart? When was the last time you were under general anesthesia?" The questions struck her like hammer blows, each one bringing her closer to the horrifying truth. Elena tried to focus, recalling her medical procedures from recent years. She had only been under general anesthesia once, 8 years prior, when she underwent an appendectomy. At the time, Sterling had insisted the surgery be performed at his private practice rather than the city hospital. Why would you need outside doctors? I'll supervise everything myself. I'll be there every step of the way. He had said. The detective carefully recorded every word, clarifying details as needed. Who else was in the operating room? How long did the surgery last? What was the post-operative period like? Elena answered mechanically, but with each question, a chilling suspicion solidified in her soul. Sterling had, indeed, controlled everything. He had been present from start to finish. Detective Blunt explained that inserting an IUD without a patient's consent constituted a serious crime against that person, especially considering the device used was known to be hazardous to health. The maximum penalty for such actions could be up to 10 years in federal prison. The following day, the hospital room phone rang. It was the medical records laboratory. The voice on the other end sounded official and impersonal, but the information it delivered was like an electric shock. The IUD with serial number N3847 was registered as having been disposed of on March 15, 8 years ago, at Sterling's own women's health practice. Detective Blunt, who was present during the call, immediately contacted her colleagues to obtain the disposal records. Elena lay in bed, watching her last shred of hope, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, crumble. Sterling's footsteps drew closer to the office, and Elaine braced herself for the most difficult confrontation of her life. She was about to look directly into the eyes of the man who had been methodically trying to kill her for 8 long years, all the while playing the role of a loving husband and caring doctor. She had to summon every ounce of strength she possessed to stand firm against his inevitable lies and manipulations. The office door swung open, and Sterling appeared in the doorway, a bouquet of vibrant red roses clutched in his hands. He looked rested and cheerful, clearly anticipating a warm reunion with his wife after a week of separation. But his expression instantly morphed when he saw Elaine seated at his computer, the incriminating correspondence displayed on the screen. "Ella," he said uncertainly, "what are you doing here? Why are you going through my computer?" His voice trembled slightly, and his eyes darted nervously between the screen and his wife's face, desperately trying to gauge the extent of the damage. The roses slipped from his grasp, scattering across the floor, the symbolic demise of their fabricated domestic bliss. Elaine wordlessly turned the monitor towards him, allowing him to read his own damning words about gifting her with a little something during her surgery. Sterling visibly paled, realizing that his most carefully guarded secrets had been laid bare. Fear flickered in his eyes, quickly followed by a surge of anger, and then, once again, the chilling grip of fear. He understood that his career, his reputation, and his very freedom were hanging precariously by a thread. "It's not what you think," he stammered, desperately searching for an explanation, any explanation, for the inexplicable. "I can explain everything. It was a medical necessity. You don't understand all the circumstances." But his voice lacked conviction, sounding unconvincing even to himself. His name had become synonymous with professional betrayal and unspeakable cruelty. 1 year later, Elaine stood before a mirror, admiring herself in an ivory-colored wedding dress that perfectly accentuated her slender but noticeably stronger figure. Regular medical checkups had confirmed that the precancerous changes had been arrested, and her body was gradually healing after the removal of the source of the slow poisoning. Standing beside her was Dr. Marcus Oakley, who over the past year had become not only her trusted doctor but also a dear friend and confidant, and now her future husband. "Your lab work is completely normal," he said, gently adjusting her veil. "The risk of cancer has receded and the inflammatory processes have ceased. Your body is showing an amazing capacity for recovery." Elaine smiled, feeling a warmth spread throughout her as she embraced the promise of hope and new love. A small girl of about 5 years old then came into the standing in the doorway, bathed in soft light and wearing a pristine white dress. She held a basket overflowing with rose petals. "Mommy, you look so pretty," Aaliyah exclaimed, the little girl Elena had adopted 6 months prior. Aaliyah had tragically lost her parents in a car accident and spent a long time in a children's home until fate, in its mysterious way, brought her to a woman who also understood profound loss and heartache. Elena knelt down and embraced her daughter, her heart swelling with an overwhelming love for this precious child. Motherhood had arrived in her life unexpectedly, not in the way she had once envisioned, but it was no less real, no less profound. Aaliyah had called her mommy from the very beginning, as if they were always meant to be a family. Marcus, the man she now called her future husband, offered her his arm with a gentle smile. "It's time," he said softly. "The guests are waiting, and you know the minister isn't a fan of tardiness." The facts were coalescing into a horrifying portrait of betrayal by the man she had entrusted with her life. Dr. Harmon returned with the results of the urgent pathology report, his face grim. The tissue samples taken during the operation revealed the presence of atypical cells characteristic of a precancerous condition. Stage 3 dysplasia required immediate additional treatment and permanent oncological monitoring. "This is a direct consequence of long-term exposure to the carcinogenic device," the surgeon explained. "If the IUD had remained in your body for another year or two, we would be dealing with advanced cancer. You were incredibly lucky that you went to Dr. Oakley when you did." His words sounded like a death sentence, not only for her health, but also for her marriage. Elena requested her phone to call Sterling and confront him with what had happened. But when she dialed his number, an unfamiliar woman answered. "Hello, who is this?" a woman's voice asked, laced with irritation. "Sterling is busy right now. He's taking care of a sick patient." Elena silently hung up, realizing her husband's deceit ran far deeper than she could have imagined. Detective Blunt received copies of the documents from Sterling's practice via fax. According to the medical device disposal log, IUD and 3847 had been written off as defective and slated for destruction. The signature next to the entry was that of the practice manager, Sterling himself. But instead of being destroyed, the device had been used for the secret sterilization of his own wife. Detective Blunt informed Elena that they now had enough evidence to open a criminal case. Witness testimonies, medical records, expert analysis results, everything pointed to the deliberate actions of Sterling. All that remained was to obtain his confession or uncover additional clues confirming the motive behind the crime. Elena lay in the hospital room, staring at the ceiling, struggling to grasp the magnitude of the betrayal. His words were jumbled and incoherent, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. Elaine stood up from the desk and walked towards him, holding the container with the blackened IUD aloft. "Here's your little gift," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within. "For 8 years, you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, deprived me of the ability to have children, drove me to the brink of cancer, and all this time, you played the part of a loving, devoted husband." Sterling lunged forward, trying to snatch the container from her hands, but Elaine deftly sidestepped him. His carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely, revealing the true face of the man she had shared half her life with. It was the face of a cornered predator, desperate to protect himself, a man for whom she had never been anything more than an obstacle to his happiness with another woman. Sterling remained frozen in the office doorway. His face was a chaotic mix of emotions, initial surprise, then dawning comprehension, morphing into raw fear and, finally, utter despair. The roses lay scattered on the floor, their vibrant red petals staining the carpet, creating a macabre tableau of a shattered idol. He saw his private correspondence with Eliva glaring from the computer screen, confirming that his most terrible secrets had been exposed, yet he still clung to the hope of somehow wriggling his way out of the situation. "Ella, what are you doing here?" he repeated, taking a tentative step into the room. "Why are you digging through my personal files? This is a gross violation of privacy. You have absolutely no right." His voice shook with nervous tension, and his hands clenched into tight fists. He was still attempting to portray himself as the wronged husband, whose privacy had been unjustly invaded. Elaine slowly turned to face him, the container holding the blackened IUD clutched tightly in her hand. Elena took his arm, feeling a sense of calm confidence wash over her. Ahead lay a new life, a life built upon a strong foundation of honesty, unwavering trust, and authentic love. As she stepped out of the house, she paused, turning to look back at the windows of the apartment where years of deception and suffering had played out. Now, it was simply a building, stripped of its power to evoke painful emotions. The past was firmly behind her, and the future shimmered with the promise of brightness and purpose. And that, my friends, is my story. A journey that began in the deepest, darkest depths of shock and despair, and culminated right here, in this beautiful, hopeful new beginning. When I look back at those years, at the pain, the insidious gaslighting, and the monstrous deception, it's hard not to feel that deep, lingering ache. But you know what? That very pain was the fire that ultimately forced me to listen to that quiet, persistent voice within. The voice that whispered, "Something is wrong, Elaine.
Get out now."
If there's one thing I want you to take away from my journey, it's this. The greatest act of love is the fierce, unwavering protection of your own truth. Never silence that gut feeling, that little flicker of doubt, that inner intuition. It's your internal compass, and it's more reliable than any vow or wedding ring. Sterling tried to extinguish my light, my ability to make choices, my very health, and even my chance at motherhood. But what he failed to realize is that utter ruin can actually be the fertile soil where something real, something genuinely good, can finally take root and flourish. I lost a husband, a home, and the life I thought I was destined to have. But in the process, I found myself. I found justice. I found Marcus. And I found Aaliyah. My family wasn't destroyed. It was simply waiting to be built correctly, on a bedrock of honesty and genuine, heartfelt care. The man she had shared her life with for 15 years, the man she had entrusted with her body and soul, was capable of monstrous cruelty. He wasn't merely lying to her. He was methodically destroying her health, robbing her of the ability to have children, and exposing her to the risk of cancer. But the most horrifying realization was that, throughout it all, Sterling had been playing the role of a loving husband and doctor. He comforted her when she complained of pain, prescribed treatments that could never alleviate her suffering, knowing full well the true cause of her ailment. Every word of consolation, every explanation about age-related changes, was a cynical lie. Now, she had to fight not only for her health, but also find the strength to confront the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court proceedings, the investigation, the daunting task of proving what seemed unbelievable even to herself. But, most importantly, she had to find the answer to the question that haunted her most. Why did Sterling do this? What drove him to commit such a heinous crime against his loving wife? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube knows you're interested in stories like this and recommends more quality narratives. Discharged from the hospital 3 days after surgery, Elena went directly to the women's health practice where Sterling worked. Detective Blunt had granted her special permission to examine her husband's office as part of the investigation. The security guard, though reluctant, allowed her entry, casting furtive glances at his phone, as if contemplating whether to alert the manager of his wife's arrival. Everything in Sterling's office was intimately familiar. The massive oak desk, the leather chair, the framed diplomas adorning the walls, the photograph from their trip to Hawaii. But now, this once comforting setting felt sinister, a carefully constructed facade concealing a monstrous secret. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the cold, unwavering fire of righteous anger. "Is this your surprise?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm as she held up the container. "For 8 years, you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, robbed me of my ability to have children, and pushed me to the verge of a life-threatening illness." Sterling lunged at her once more, desperately trying to seize the evidence from her grasp. "Give that to me," he yelled, finally losing the last vestiges of his self-control. "You don't understand what you're doing. This could ruin my career, my entire reputation." Elaine dodged him again, protectively pressing the container against her chest. For the first time in all their years of marriage, she saw her husband's true face, stripped bare of all pretense and artifice. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Detective Blunt's voice cut through the charged silence. "Sterling Nicholas Thames," she announced in an official tone, stepping into the office, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. "You are under arrest on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Sterling whirled around to face the newcomers, his face contorted with disbelief and horror. "This is a complete misunderstanding," he began, desperately trying to salvage some semblance of his former dignity. "I am a respected doctor, a pillar of the community. I have an impeccable reputation. You can't possibly arrest me based on the delusional accusations of my emotionally unstable wife." Detective Blunt produced a pair of handcuffs, her face remaining impassive and professional. "We have all the necessary evidence, including medical examination results, IUD disposal documents, and credible witness testimony. Your wife has also provided us with digital correspondence in which you yourself confess to the crimes committed. And for that, I am eternally grateful for the second chance I fought so hard to achieve. Life can be undeniably brutal, but it is also brilliantly, gloriously kind when you finally stand up for yourself and reclaim your power. Hold on to hope, because even after the deepest betrayal, the sun absolutely rises again, bringing with it the promise of a new dawn." If you feel connected to my story and you enjoyed listening, please show your support by giving this video a like. Let's see those numbers climb. And I'm curious, what city are you listening to me from, and what time is it where you are? Share it in the comments below. If you'd like to further support me on my journey, you can send a small donation through the link provided. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and for sharing your precious time with me. For more empowering life stories like this, be sure to check out the other videos on my channel and don't forget to subscribe. And right now, there are 2 new life stories appearing on the screen that I'm confident you'll find incredibly interesting. Click 1 to start listening right away. With love. Elena approached the safe, the code of which, their wedding date, she knew by heart. Inside were documents Sterling considered particularly valuable. Among them, she found a thick folder containing medical device logs from the past 10 years. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, searching for the entry from March 15th, 8 years prior. And there it was, the entry documenting the disposal of IUD and 3847, accompanied by Sterling's sprawling signature. The office door quietly opened, and a young woman in a white coat appeared in the doorway. Elena recognized her as Oliva Ree, one of the clinic's nurses, usually cheerful and efficient. But now, Oliva's face reflected confusion and fear at the sight of the manager's wife holding the documents. "Elena," Oliva stammered uncertainly. "What are you doing here? Dr. Thames said you were in the hospital after surgery." The nurse was concealing something behind her back, but Elena caught a glimpse of the telltale packaging of a pregnancy test. "I've already been discharged," Elena replied, carefully studying the young woman's face. Oliva appeared distressed, her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting nervously. "What is that in your hand?" Elena inquired, already suspecting the answer. The nurse grew even more flustered, clutching the test to her chest. "It's personal," Oliva mumbled, her voice unconvincing. Elena noticed a gold ring with a small diamond sparkling on the ring finger of her right hand, a ring strikingly similar to her own wedding ring, the one Sterling had given her 15 years ago. "That's a beautiful ring," Elena commented, gesturing towards the nurse's hand. "Where did you buy something like that?" Oliva instinctively hid her hand behind her back, but it was too late. It was a gift from my sweetheart, she replied quietly, a note of defiance entering her voice, as if she were defending something precious. Elena felt a tightening within her, a premonition of further revelations. At that moment, Oliva burst into the house, her face streaked with tears and her cell phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Sterling," she cried. "The security guard at the clinic called me and said the police were here. What's going on?" Seeing the handcuffs in the detective's hands, she rushed to her lover, instinctively trying to shield him from the officers. "I'll tell you everything," Oliva sobbed, turning to Detective Blunt. "It was his idea, not mine. He told me his wife was infertile from birth, that they hadn't lived as husband and wife for years. I swear I didn't know that he was the one who made her sick." Her confession poured out in a torrent of sobs, shattering Sterling's last desperate hopes of escaping justice. Sterling shoved Oliva away and turned to face Elaine, a final, desperate attempt to justify his actions flickering in his eyes. "I did this for us," he said pleadingly. "You yourself said you weren't ready for children, that you wanted to focus on building your career first. I just helped you avoid an unwanted pregnancy." Elaine looked at him with undisguised disgust, unable to comprehend how this man could still try to shift the blame onto her. "I said I wanted to wait a year, not become permanently infertile," she replied icily. "You deprived me of my right to choose, condemned me to a life of suffering and potential illness, and all for her, for your children with your mistress." Detective Blunt snapped the handcuffs onto Sterling's wrists, ignoring his increasingly frantic protests and feeble attempts to resist. "Oliva Reese," she addressed the weeping nurse, "you need to come with us to provide a formal statement. You are a key witness in this case." The nurse nodded numbly, understanding that her life, too, had been irrevocably altered. Sterling was led towards the exit, but he continued to turn back to Elaine, desperately searching for a glimmer of their former love, or perhaps just pity, in her eyes. Did Sterling's betrayal extend even further than she had imagined? Did he have a mistress, in addition to the secret sterilization, to whom he bestowed the same ring he had given his wife? Oliva attempted to leave the office, but in the hallway, an older woman with a noticeably rounded belly called out to her. Elena recognized her as Marina Vance, a longtime patient of the clinic who had been under their care for years. The woman looked tired but happy, clearly expecting a child later in life. "Oliva, thank you so much," the pregnant woman said, embracing the nurse. "If it weren't for you, I don't know how we would have managed the housing for me and my kids. Dr. Thames is such a kind man. He helped with the apartment paperwork. My older ones are so happy they're going to have another little brother or sister." Elena froze, stunned by those words. It meant Sterling had children with other women, and he was providing them with housing. How many secrets was the man she had considered her husband concealing? Oliva realized Elena had overheard the conversation, and her face paled with fear. "Marina Vance, not here," the nurse whispered, trying to steer the pregnant woman away from the manager's office. But it was too late. Elena had heard enough to grasp the magnitude of the deception. Sterling had not only robbed her of the ability to have children but was fathering them with other women. The patient departed, leaving Oliva standing in the hallway, unsure of what to do. Elena exited the office, clutching the logbook, and approached the nurse. "How many children does he have?" she asked, locking eyes with the young woman. Oliva attempted to deny it, but her gaze betrayed her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, her voice trembling with distress. "Dr. Thames just helps patients. He's a good doctor." Elena shook her head, realizing the nurse was either deceiving herself or complicit in this elaborate charade. Just then, the security guard's phone rang. "Ella," he pleaded, "we can fix everything. I'll find the best doctors. We'll cure you. Please, don't ruin our family over one mistake." His words sounded hollow and pathetic, even to his own ears. Elaine watched in silence as the man she had lived with for 15 years was led away. She felt no emotion other than a profound sense of emptiness and a strange sense of relief. The man she had once loved had died to her the moment she read his sickening correspondence with his mistress. What was being led away now was nothing more than an empty shell, concealing a stranger, an enemy. Oliva lingered hesitantly in the doorway, her gaze flitting between Elaine and the departing Sterling. "I truly didn't know," she whispered. "He told me you were sick from birth. That doctors had forbidden you to get pregnant. I honestly thought I was helping him find happiness with a woman who could give him children." Elaine looked at her with a flicker of pity, realizing that Oliva, too, had been a victim of Sterling's elaborate manipulations.
How old are you?
She asked quietly. 26, the nurse replied, her voice barely audible. Elaine shook her head sadly, realizing that Sterling had preyed upon a very young woman when she was barely 20 years old. "He used you too, Oliva," Elaine said wearily. "He promised to divorce me, marry you, but in reality, he just wanted a young mistress and children on the side. If it weren't for all of this, he never would have left me because I provided him with stability and respectability." Oliva began to cry even harder, finally grasping the full truth of Elaine's words. "What's going to happen to my children now?" she sobbed. "How am I going to explain to them that their daddy is a criminal? How will I support them without his help?" Elaine felt a pang of unexpected sympathy for her, despite everything that had transpired. Detective Blunt returned for Oliva, patiently waiting for her to finish speaking with Elaine. He had been watching them from his booth. Elena overheard fragments of the conversation, piecing together that someone was inquiring about the situation at the practice. "Yes," the guard said into the phone. "His wife was here, looking for something in his office. Oliva caught her, and they were talking about something." Elena realized she was running out of time. Sterling would undoubtedly learn of her visit and attempt to hide or destroy the incriminating documents. She swiftly photographed the logbook page documenting the IUD disposal, along with several other suspicious entries, using her phone. Oliva remained nearby, clearly wrestling with an internal conflict. On one hand, she was loyal to Sterling. On the other, she witnessed his wife's suffering and sensed something profoundly wrong. The pregnancy test in her hand served as undeniable proof that her relationship with the practice manager extended beyond that of a nurse. Elena decided to take a risk. "Is it his?" she asked, gesturing towards the test in Oliva's hand. The nurse remained silent, but her silence spoke volumes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched the test to her chest, as if shielding her unborn child from a cruel world. "We really need to go," the detective said gently. "The sooner we process all the statements, the sooner you can get back to your children." Oliva nodded meekly and shuffled towards the exit, but paused at the doorway. "Forgive me," she said to Elaine, her voice choked with emotion. "I know my apologies won't change anything, but I truly didn't want to cause you any harm." Elaine nodded silently, unable to find the words to respond. Forgiveness would come later, when the raw pain of betrayal had subsided, when she could reflect on this horrifying chapter without shuddering. The house emptied, and Elaine was left alone amidst the scattered roses and the shattered remnants of her former life. She picked up a few of the fallen petals, remembering how she used to be thrilled by such romantic gestures from her husband. Now, those flowers felt like a cruel mockery, Sterling's last desperate attempt to preserve the illusion of a normal relationship. She walked into the bedroom and began gathering his belongings, realizing she could no longer bear to see anything in the house that reminded her of him. Every photograph, every book, every article of clothing was tainted with lies and deception. She had to begin her life anew, cleansing her space of the haunting ghosts of the past. The phone rang, shattering the heavy silence.
Dr.